Today I'm going to show you how to create an easy Merry Christmas card with lights using the Lawn Fawn Stringer Lights dies. Hi Papercraft friends, I'm Lisa and I love to help you create some awesome Papercraft projects. Consider subscribing and click that notification bell so that you can be instantly alerted every time I upload a new video. So let's get creating, shall we? So to start with creating this card, I use the MFT A2 Stitch Rectangle Stack Set 1 dies, the largest die, to die cut the panel from Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock. And then I grabbed my large dotted circle stackable dies from Lawn Fawn, and with the large die I'm going to die cut a circle with some silver cardstock. We're going to be using the largest die from the small dotted circle stackables and the second largest from the large dotted circle stackable dies. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a frame. So we're going to turn the dies upside down and just grab some low tack washi tape and just secure them down so that when you run them through the die cut machine, they don't actually move around. Now I'm actually going to use white cardstock for this, and I'm going to run it through the die cutting machine 3 times. You basically want to end up with 3 circle frames so that you can adhere those together a bit later on, but we're actually going to concentrate on just the die cutting at the moment. So now what we want to do is we want to take the middle one out, and we're going to use this one to create a hole in the center. So this will be our silver frame, and you just want to make sure that you align it correctly so that it's even on all sides. And then you can secure the die with some low tack washi tape. Now I would actually put the washi tape in the middle of the die because otherwise it will indent the silver cardstock as you put it through the die cutting machine. So now that we got it all lined up properly, we're going to put it through the die cut machine. And then you can see that it's created a frame. And now using the largest circle die, we're going to grab some acetate and also die cut the circle with the largest circle die. There you go, we now got a circle of acetate, which we're actually going to use for a backing behind the silver frame. So we're just going to adhere the acetate to the silver frame. So I'm just going to use some tape runner adhesive to adhere the acetate to the silver frame. There you go. So now you've got your acetate on your silver frame. So now moving on, we have our little frame with the acetate in the middle, our card panel, and you should have 3 circle frames that you've just created. So now we're going to be creating our lights, our Christmas lights. So for that, I'm going to be using the Lawn Fawn Stringer Lights dies, and I'm going to be using the largest ones. And because we're going to be creating 2 light bulbs, and also because I absolutely love dimension on my cards, each one of the light bulbs is going to have 3 layers of white cardstock. So ultimately, I'm going to die cut this one 6 times out of white cardstock. So now that we've die cut those out, we now need to move on to the tops of the light bulbs. We now need 2 sets of these, and you need to die cut them with silver cardstock. Okie dokie, so now that you've created 2 sets of the top part of the light bulb, we can now move on to the next step. And the next step is actually adhering the circle frames together. And also, if you've die cut 6 of the light bulbs, we're going to adhere 3 together to create 2 sets of the light bulbs. Now I use liquid glue for this because I find it easier so that I can maneuver the dies around a little bit before they actually get stuck down for good. And once you've created the first light bulb and adhered them all down correctly, you can then move on to the second one. And just wiggle them around with your fingers just to make sure that all the edges are aligned correctly. And then they're done. So now all we need to do is move on to the circle frames and just adhere those into place. So you're adhering 3 together. And again, I'm using liquid glue because it gives me that little bit of extra time just to maneuver them into place so that they're lined up together and not overlapping all wonky, if that makes any sense. Do you use these adhesive bottles? I tell you, I have stacks of craft glue. It just gets clogged every time. But like I was saying, I've got stacks of craft glue in my supplies, and as much as I really am hanging out to try the Lawn Fawn glue adhesive, I don't want to just yet because I want to use the craft glue that I've already got. But however, this little adhesive bottle just gets clogged every single time, and I'm always having to pierce the tip of it again just to make sure that the glue will run freely and not keep getting stuck all the time. It's such a pain. If you have any suggestions, any other bottles or whatever that you use that you find that work really, really well, please leave me a comment and let me know which ones that you do use. Okay, so now that we've actually put these together, we can now move on to the next step, which is actually some heat embossing. And I'm going to be using the Ranger white embossing powder, which is a super fine. And we're going to stamp some snowflakes that I've got here on my acrylic block. These little snowflakes are actually from a few different stamp sets. So what I will do is I will list them and I will link them below in the description so that you know exactly which ones they are. But I'm sure you probably have a few stamp sets yourself that do actually have a few snowflakes. So if you can just use those. You don't need these specific ones. I'm using my Versamark watermark ink pad and my anti-static powder. Now I do find that this one doesn't work very well. So what I do is I just add some into this little container and then just smother the light bulb with the anti-static powder so that you get a nice crisp, clean stamp. And the last thing you want is embossing powder everywhere else except for where the stamps have been done. Just make sure that the snowflake stamps are actually covered properly with the Versamark watermark ink. And then just position your stamps on the light bulbs where you want them to go. Now it doesn't matter if they actually ink off the edge of the light bulb, which actually I think gives a better look if they do. And then you just put the embossing powder over the light bulb. Give a little bit of tap, make sure the excess of the embossing powder is just where you stamped the little snowflakes. Now you can actually do this after you've ink blended the light bulbs as well, but I personally like to do them before I ink blend, purely because I think that you need to leave the ink to dry a little bit, otherwise the embossing powder would actually stick to the ink before it's ready to be dry. That's why I always prefer to do the heat embossing first and then doing the ink blending. Okay, just grab your heat tool, heat it up for a few seconds and then set the embossing powder onto your light bulbs. And there you go. Now have 2 heat embossed little light bulbs. So now we're going on to our ink blending, and we're going to ink blend the circle frame, and we're also going to ink blend the light bulbs. And the colours I'm going to use is Peacock Feathers Distress Ink and also the Evergreen Bow Distress Ink. I'm going to be using the Peacock Feathers first and just trying to be darker on the left hand side and lighter on the right hand side, as if the light was shining off the bulbs. And now we're going to use the Evergreen Bow for like a little bit of shade on the light bulbs. A little bit of a darker colour to the Peacock Feathers. And then I'll just go in again with the Peacock Feathers just to blend it in a little bit more. And that's it. Cute. So we shall put that aside and we'll do the same with the circle frame. That way they're colour coordinated with the actual mermaid cardstock that we used for the card panel. Just going to use a little bit of scrap paper so that I don't get my fingerprints on the ink and also I don't get the ink on my fingers. Well, that's a theory anyway. I just love this colour. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Now, of course, these are non-traditional colours for Christmas, but I mean, you can do whatever colours you like. You could also use coloured cardstock for your circle frame rather than actually ink blending them. And just as long as you can keep the light bulbs and the circle frame colour coordinated. Or you could even do your light bulbs in the same colour cardstock as well that you'll be using for the circle frame. And now that's done. So now we're going to adhere the little light bulb thingies onto the top of the light bulb itself. Now it's up to you. You can just use this one layer piece or you can use this on top as well. It really doesn't make much difference. It's up to you and what you personally like. I like to add the other piece purely because it does give that extra special touch and a little bit more dimension. And there you have your first little light bulb. And then you just simply do the same with the next one. So now you want to grab your circle frame with the acetate. And what we're going to do is adhere the circle frame that you've ink blended and adhere that onto the top of the silver one. So again, I'm going to be using liquid adhesive if the actual bottle will let me get to the adhesive. Oh my, look. Are you serious? Like, seriously. Seriously, I'm just going to throw this thing in the bin. And then you just want to adhere the circle frame onto the silver one. Take our card base, which is an A2 size card base. We're going to adhere the card panel onto the card base. I'm just going to use some washi tape on the inside just to hold the card base closed. It just makes things a little bit easier to line up and to make sure that it stays closed. This always happens to me. That's why I like using liquid glue. Now I've already gone ahead and stamped and heat embossed my sentiment, which reads Merry Christmas, from the Sunny Studios Polar Playmate stamp set. And all we need to do is ink that up. You know what I totally forgot to do with the light bulbs? Was actually remove the ink from the heat embossing. So you just grab a slightly damp rag or you could use some paper toweling and just rub over the top of the heat embossing. It would just take the surface of the ink off of the heat embossing and it will look more prominent and more white. So the next part we're going to do is adhere the circle to the actual card. So now all you need to do is position the light bulbs as to where you want it in the circle frame. I totally forgot to hit the record button. Okay, so all I've done is basically adhere one of the light bulbs to the acetate, and I did use liquid glue for that. And now for the second one, I'm just using a few foam tabs so that I can adhere those to the acetate. It will have a bit of dimension to the light bulb, or the Christmas light, should I say. So I just want to prop up the sentiment a little bit. So I've chopped some foam squares in half, and I'm just going to put a little bit of liquid glue so I got time to maneuver it around a little bit. So now we're just going to grab some silver thread just to make a bow. Just play around with the bow until you're happy with it and happy with the right size. I actually got this thread from some old packaging. I've had it in my stash for, the longest time. I got so much of it. I like to make sure that the bows are roughly the same size. And then you're going to use your hot glue gun to actually secure those. So I noticed that there were a few white marks on the actual circle frame. So I did actually die cut another one and ink blended it, and then I just laid it on the top. That way there's no marks, so it looks a lot better. So I forgot to hit the record button yet again, but all I did was I just snipped off the ends of the silver thread, and I think this card is pretty much a clean and simple card. I just don't want to take away from the elegance of the card. So I'm only going to use just a few of the rhinestones that I have here. Very simple, and I think you could easily batch make these cards for sure. In fact, that's exactly what I did do. I created a few more of these easy Merry Christmas cards in several different non-traditional colours, just to be that little bit different. And I've also listed them in my brand new Etsy shop. So if you want to go check that out, and also the supplies I used to create these cards, you'll find them listed in the description below. Go check it out. Now I've got more Christmas card videos coming up, so be sure to click that subscribe button and also the notification bell. Now if you love interactive cards, check out this next video, and we can get our crafty on a lot more together there. See you there.